Hi, my name is Anna Northcutt. I've completed the National Bible Bee Summer Study 9 times, and I've advanced to the National Competition 8. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about a component on the qualifying test that I never fail to underestimate, the study passage. While I don't think it's necessary to memorize the study passage in order to qualify, I can understand why a lot of kids choose to do it just because Bible Bee does like to ask very detailed questions about the study passage on the qualifying test. For example, how many porches were around the pool of Bethesda? If you knew the answer was 5, then you probably either memorized the study passage, read it over and over so many times that you kind of inadvertently memorized the majority of it, or you just got that question wrong on a recent practice test and the shame burned the information into your soul. My point being, the more familiar you are with the ins and outs of the study passage, the better.
I would say knowing the study passage well is the most important thing. I've realized that from experience that I do better on the test when I know my study passage better.
With the study passage, reading it every day is probably one of the most important things that you do. Sometimes with longer passages, that's hard, so I'll break it up into 2 days, or I'll read some of the passage in the morning, some of the passage later in the day.
Some years I would have the kids read along and then listen to the audio Bible version of the text, the entire passage. And I know some people will do that. They might do it twice a day. I found that actually wasn't super beneficial. It just took more time. So I actually cycle through. When we did Ruth, the first week, the kids would listen to Ruth 1 every single day. And then on Monday, it was Ruth 1 and 2. And then on Tuesday, Ruth 1 and 3. And on Wednesday, Ruth 1 and 4. So I kind of cycle through.
I'll usually print the study passage out and then highlight things that I think are important. And then I'll circle different things. I'll write numbers on the side. So say a certain person is mentioned this amount of times in a chapter or a certain word, then I'll write that on the side, or I'll tally mark it as I'm reading through it.
I write a lot of questions too that I use when we play review games.
If it's a short study passage, I will normally memorize it, which helps a lot with the random access and study passage questions.
Hold up, what's random access? Well, imagine a question on the qualifying test that not only required you to know the nitty-gritty details of the study passage, but also required you to be able to recall which verse each nitty-gritty detail came from. By the way, you don't have to imagine it, I'll put it up on the screen. Now, Jesus moves around quite a lot in John 2, and to make matters worse, he goes to Capernaum in verse 12 and Jerusalem in verse 13. Not that Jesus going anywhere ever made matters worse. In fact, he usually had quite the opposite effect, but you know what I mean. Anyway, you would really have a hard time answering this question without knowing specifically what happened in verse 13, chapter 2 of John, and that's where random access comes in.
RA stands for random access, and that's basically like with the study passage. If on the test you're given a question like, which verse talks about this, you're able to know from the reference what that verse says. Or the other way around, if they say, which verse in the study passage mentions clothing, oh, that's Ruth 2:4 or whatever it is.
I don't think being really good at RA necessarily means memorizing the study passage, at least not in a conventional sense. Like Elias said, it's more about knowing what happens in each verse, kind of like if every verse in the study passage were a cross-reference that you needed to know the reference and the summary of, even if you couldn't quote it word for word. Memorizing the study passage would definitely help with RA, especially if you could notice the verse break while you were memorizing, but I think you can learn RA without memorizing the study passage, and I think you can memorize the study passage without learning RA, if that makes sense. Maybe you're thinking now, whoa Anna, RA sounds really scary. You know what, I completely agree. It kind of terrifies me too. That's why instead of facing my fear, I've always used outlines. One thing I have always tried to make a point of doing, however, is if the Bible Bee already gave me an outline for a chapter, I try to use their outline rather than creating my own. Sure, I might include a little more detail and like summarizing the content, but I use the same range of verses. And interestingly, I've heard a lot of people do the same thing for RA, because they've noticed that the RA questions the Bible Bee asks on the qualifying test are usually ones that were already in the Discovery Journal.
For me, a big way to learn random access is to study it in the context of the Discovery Journal. So if they're talking about a certain verse, I look at their perspective because I know that's what they're going to probably test on.
So now that I told you how to get out of studying RA, let's talk about how to get into studying it. The most common response I got for how to study RA was definitely Quizlet, and this makes sense because it's really easy to write the reference for a verse on one side of a Quizlet card and then the actual scripture on the other, and also
Normally there's a bunch of those sets you can find in your version.
you can, of course, also make Quizlet sets for the outline of a study passage just as easily.
The other way we do the random access is we do use Quizlet sets a lot. And for that, we tried like the verse, every single verse individually, and I found it was really overwhelming. And my oldest daughter, Hannah, found this way that she essentially makes an outline. It's a pretty detailed outline, and she does these summary statements. And so I give her Quizlet sets to my younger kids, and they'll practice the random access that way as well.
Now, I did have one extremely traumatizing incident where I was trying to half-heartedly look through what was supposed to be a KJV RA Quizlet set, and I found one verse from another translation that may or may not occasionally go by the alias Nearly Inspired Version. But I digress, because even more important than my traumatic experience is the question, can you qualify without learning RA?
If it's a longer study passage, I would say it's probably not as important. The thing with that is it really comes down to the year. There are some years where you can get away without knowing like the RA, but then there's some where it really, you'd have to like be really like confident on like a lot of the other things in order to not be able to have to do the RA and knowing like individual details of each verse. So if that, it just really comes down to the year.
I would say kind of like cross-reference summaries. If your outline is detailed enough, you could almost certainly figure out any question that required you to know a specific verse. But I definitely get the idea that
If you know that verse, then it's a lot faster than just trying to figure out a verse that says that.
I know I come across plenty of questions on the qualifying test every year where I'm just like, man, that is 100% an RA question, and I have no idea what the answer is. I wish I'd studied a little more in that area. I've never felt like not studying RA has kept me from qualifying, but I can't deny that I'm always kind of surprised by the sheer number of study passage-oriented questions on the qualifying test. So leave a comment down below. Do you think it's important to know RA for the qualifying test, and why? And while you're doing that, listen to Rachel English.
Yes, competition is a motivator, and it's good to have competition with, and especially with like-minded young people and good, godly friends. But don't let that either scare you or become your main focus. Just press on to know the Lord and know that we're hiding His word in our hearts so that we will know Him more and not sin against Him.